Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those who have joined. Welcome to the rebooting of the Path to MANRS webinar series. I'm your host, Robbie Mitchell. It's a pleasure to have you all attending today, and thank you very much to our guest, Fredrik Korsbäck, who's the Senior Network Infrastructure at IP and Edge at AWS. And today we're going to be talking about AWS's Path to MANRS, but more specifically about the really intricate and interesting path to RPKI as well. So Fredrik and I actually had this discussion after NANOG last year, I believe, where you presented on this, and we wanted to share this with the MANRS community more broadly for those who weren't able to attend the NANOG or see the recording there. So we're going to go through some of the really interesting aspects of that. This isn't applicable to all networks. There'd be only a very small minority of networks that a lot of this would be applicable to. But at the same time, it's really interesting to understand the, I wouldn't say the challenges that you need to go through when deploying RPKI. It's not a one size fits all, but there's a lot to learn from others as well. And to also know the connectivity providers that you're working with, how they're going about with this important issue of RPKI and also becoming MANRS compliant. So first off, thank you very much for joining us, Fredrik.
Thanks, Robbie.
So let's get started. So when did you start deploying RPKI at AWS?
Like what year is it? Like pre-COVID, right? No, I mean, I guess we started like 4 years ago. Perhaps we even started before my time. I mean, I'm almost 5 years in the company now, but I would say it started for real about 4 years ago, 3.5 maybe. And it was after a fairly big series of high-profile BGP hijacks, where we finally got like that the whole organization concluded, like, hey, we need to do something about this, right? It got VP level type of visibility, which obviously made our life a lot easier. Like there's a lot of people inside the company that have been trying to do this for a long time, but perhaps it was hard to get the right financing and the right team involved. But yeah, I would say that's when we started, and it was a long planning process for sure. Given the size of the company and the size of the organization, the size of the network, it was not easy to begin with. But we've come a long way since then, for sure.
Definitely. I mean, that's not a selling point that you really want to use when trying to go to management to deploy RPKI, but it's a very effective selling point at the same time. We've been attacked, and we could have prevented this if we deployed RPKI.
Yeah, exactly. And also roughly at the same time, customers actually started asking for this. And I think this is as with everything in this industry, right? As soon as the customer starts asking for it, like, yeah, I guess we can make some parallels here with like IPv6 deployment and these things, right? Is like everyone on the technical side agrees that it's the right thing to do. But unless customers and those type of things hear back from you, right? Then you don't know that you need to do it, right? It's hard to prioritize. But certainly 4 years ago, that was very high on the priority list, and still is today, of course.
Yep, definitely. So who was involved in those initial discussions? Was it a single team, or was it or was there multiple teams involved with it?
In the beginning, I guess the whole idea, I guess, came from the networking team, so the team I'm part of. But quite quickly, I think everyone realized that this is a multi-team effort, especially if for us doing RPKI means two things, right? It's first the signing part, like we need to sign our prefixes and make sure everything is up to speed there, and the other part is dropping invalids in the border. For some companies, both are equally important. For some, perhaps, I don't know, like a big transit network, that dropping invalids is more important than the signing part. For us, they are equally important, given that we're both a quite big network provider, as well as having actual IP addresses with content that people care about, right? So for us, it was obviously the networking team. We did the origin validation part. We have a software team that is essentially supporting the network with origin validation software. So with not only the actual validator, but also all the statistic systems around it. We have, I would say, a very non-standard build of RPKI validators. We can talk about more about that later. And then on the IPAM side or IP management side, we have the whole IP management team that is like setting up new processes, trying to figure out how do we keep track of all the ROAs, given that we have IP prefixes in essentially all parts of the world. Like we have RIPE, we have ARIN, we have LACNIC, APNIC, ARPHONIC, everything, right? So we needed to build processes for that to make it work. So in the end, I would say it was probably 25 people that was working with it across the board in like different stages, right, to get this through.
And you've played that point person, have you? The liaison between these different teams?
Yeah, the spider in the web, or the guy that tells a lot of things but doesn't actually do anything. I guess that's me, right? No, so I mean, we needed a holistic strategy. One of my other colleagues, one of our distinguished engineers, Tom Scholl, also had that same role, where we're just trying to make sure that all teams play nicely together and that we're focusing on the bigger picture, like what do we actually want to achieve, like how would this look like, a little bit from an outside perspective or a 10,000 feet type of perspective. So that was our goal in this.
Yeah, nice. And would you recommend that for other organizations to have that point person just so that they can have that holistic view and help with getting all those other teams underneath them to understand what each one is doing?
For sure, and specifically, I guess for large companies. I mean, for the company I was in before, which was a very, very small company, I did this whole thing there as well. But then I was doing all of it, right? I was doing the statistics system, I was doing the actual row registrations, I was doing the actual origin validation configuration, installing a routinator myself, and these things. On a larger company, that's very unlikely. That's how it will work, right? So I think having a point man and delegating these small little tasks to each individual teams, I think is the right way to do it, for sure.
Yeah. Do you feel that also experience that you had on a smaller scale helped you in this case as well? So, I mean, it doesn't mean that you need to have large scale experience. As long as you understand the fundamentals of it and being able to apply it at a small scale, it's applicable at large scale.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess that's really the reason why I was appointed that role, right? Yes, because I had done all of it myself. So I mean, I know it from a holistic perspective how it should work, but obviously I'm not an expert on building like a AWS statistics systems. Like we have actual experts for that, right? And how to configure our network devices, which works very differently from, I would say, traditional devices, right? And we have experts for that, but I know what the end result should be. And that's easy for me then to convert like a strategy into actual running code. That's for someone else to do. But if I bring the strategy, then someone else can do the coding. Okay,
great. For those who are also attending, if you do have some questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll try and get to them along the way. I've got a list of questions and I might be asking them along the way. But feel free to jump in. So we'll come back to the approach that you talked about. And remembering back to our conversation, it's been an evolution of approaches that you've taken as well with deploying your RPKI. I think you started off with a hosted model and then you've gone towards more of a hybrid model. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, we can talk about the signing part, I guess, specifically, like when we started out, we had a guy that was registering all the routes himself, right? Like every morning I woke up, he basically looked in the IPAM system and see if we, bought in a new IP space or if we something was allocated to some service or whatever. Yeah, his name was John, by the way, which will be important later. But he was doing that, and I think that's how most people start out. By just essentially hand doing this. I think it was clear quite early that this is way too much work. Also, it's not very fun. So he's like, how do you keep someone doing this all the time? So we moved over to basically like a small script that registered ROAS for us. Because one thing that we wanted to do is that we consider ROAS to be a fairly dynamic thing. We change allocation quite a lot internally, like we move IP prefixes around. We have a lot of IP space which is like unused, but with pools, so we just make smaller allocations out of our larger allocations and give them away to service teams. Like today, AWS consists of, I don't know, 400 or so services. Maybe tomorrow there will be 401 services, and that service is most likely need IP addresses, and so we have like a central vending machine, right? So whenever the vending machine tells us that there's new allocation, then we had scripts called AutoJohn that started to create ROAS, right? So we automated John away, or he automated himself away, and that was good. I mean, to some extent, we still use that today, right? But we quite quickly realized, and I guess others also noted, that when we had this velocity in registering ROAS, we sometimes broke systems as we go along. So we did cause outages actually for registering thousands of routes in like a single hour. So we have to be a little bit careful about that, and that's also the reason why I guess now it's the third generation, right, where we moved over to delegated RPKI, where we publish our own things. So we have our own TA, like, and any business can do this with, like, you have software today such as Krill, that is essentially a TA in a box, right? Or sorry, a CA in a box, and that is basically what we use. I mean, we use our own stuff, but from a fundamental perspective, how it works is the same thing. Because we thought that we wanted control over our HSMs, like we also happen to have invented our own HSMs, so we felt that we wanted to use that. So now we're in that third generation where we're still automate ROAS based upon the what you can say, the view of the world from our icon system. But we publish this in our own delegation now. So yes, we're in the third generation now. So we'll see what the future holds, but surely we would like to move over 100% of our ROAS to our own systems.
Okay. Yep, that's the end goal, and you always had that as part of your strategy as well, to move towards that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, especially, I mean, we are a fairly large infrastructure provider, and we think that to some extent we should, eat our own food in this case. So we have everything in place to build a very robust system, and if we want customers to be able to do this as well, because we think that AWS is a great service to perhaps run your own delegation on as well, then we have to try it ourselves, right? Like we cannot market it if we don't believe it ourselves, right? So that's why we decided to move everything back home, essentially.
Totally. Now, another important facet of your deployment was you also, when signing your ROAS, you're also validating from the start as well. Now, this isn't something that everyone has an approach that everyone has taken. Why did you take this approach, and what are the benefits of it in your case?
I mean, we as I said, we think that both things are equally important for a company such as ours. So we wanted to put these things in tandem. Like, register the routes can go pretty fast, and we did register routes before we dropped invalids in the border. But we had no intention of decoupling it. Like, it's one coherent strategy, even if it's made by completely different teams, I guess. So I guess what's next, right, is that we're interested also turning this on internally towards our own systems, so that we do origin validation, especially towards ourselves. There is a couple of interesting things with that, but that is something that we're working on right now, trying to figure out how that would look like. Like, we can do it on the outbound, that's fine. But with recent things such as bring your own IP and these things, or even like bit flip errors that could occasionally happen in network hardware, we see that there might be an interest to even do origin validation towards our own servers or our own BGP speakers inside our network. That's an interesting development.
Okay. Will that require some known software as well, or validation software from your part?
I mean, we already today run a slightly modified, routinator type of installation. So there is a little bit of patching we need to do to make that happen, because we do, for example, use RFC 1980 space internally. We use Class E space internally. We have a couple of interesting challenges with that, but we already had like 2 incidents this year where internal origin validation could have helped us avoid some disturbance. So it is hopefully worth the effort to make this work inside the network as well.
Yeah. And what other fallback modes have you also incorporated into the system to help? You mentioned before that when you first turned it on, you had a few challenges that you were dropping invalids where there were invalids. So what other fallback systems have you incorporated?
So now, I mean, we did actually build fallback systems, right? Like we based it on Slurm. So Slurm is one of the standard methods to essentially inject your own data into the RPKI ecosystem, at least in your own domain. We built all of that because we thought maybe there is risk here, maybe there is something that we don't know about that will happen, because we essentially had a flag day, right? Where it's like, well, today we will turn on origin validation and we will do it everywhere all at once, like boom, and basically rolling configurations, right? And this is a lot of devices. This is many thousand devices where we had to roll the config on. So we were a little bit afraid, but we thought that was really the only sensible way to do it. Like we started out, with turning on the configuration, but didn't actually drop the routes. We just put communities on them, and we monitor these communities. It's like, all right, well, what would actually be dropped when we turn this on tomorrow? We did an analysis, concluded it's like, okay, there is a couple of routes here which would be completely blocked in our network that we wouldn't see at all anymore, that we have traffic with. Essentially, we took the result of the origin validation, looked at those prefixes, took all those prefixes. I think at a time it was somewhere around 4,500 prefixes. So it was not crazy hard to look them through one by one, basically. But that's what we did. So we put them all in our netflow system. And look, it's like, do we actually do traffic with this prefix? It's like, no. Like most of them are no, right? Because they are most likely a zombie prefix or something like this. It's announced on the internet, but no one is actually using it. But we found about 10 of them where it's like, okay, this prefix actually has a lot of traffic with us. There seems to be someone alive at the other end. And I think we reached out, it's like, hey, in a week we'll turn this on. These things will happen. We do this because of this and this reason. We do have traffic with you guys. We should do something about this. Can you register the ROAS? And I think all of them did, actually. I think there was one that was lingering that actually waited until the D-Day, right? And they quickly noticed that they didn't have access to AWS, and that typically breaks stuff, right? So they fixed it very, very shortly. And we did have this exception system in place all the time. I think we got a request maybe 3 or 4 times, from external peers or external customers that is like, hey, we can't fix Aroa because X, Y, Z. Can you just take away this policy, or can you make sure that that this works anyway? And we actually said no all the time. It's like, no, there is no exceptions, even though that we actually have an exception system in place. And they accepted it, right? They were like, okay, well, I guess we have to make an exception on our side, right? And just fix the ROA. I think there was one company that was like, oh, we know that the ROA is broken. We can't fix it because we have a change freeze or something like that. I was like, well, then you should probably change that change freeze, because it's broken, right? If the building is on fire, you can't wait for if it's a Sunday, right? The firefighters need to come out anyway, right? Even if they want to take the weekend off. So they eventually just fixed that. So far today, we haven't actually ever had to use that exception system. And now I'm more confident than ever that we will probably never have to use it. We could probably stop supporting it, because today we are at such a low level of I would say, real invalids. I always try to make the exception or show the difference between real invalids and fake invalids, or whatever you want to call them, right? Like the invalids that are traffic engineering stuff. So if there's a valid ROA and a valid prefix for a larger prefix, like a /18 or something, and then there is more specific is being sent out, they are blocked. So they are not completely unreachable. It's just that the traffic engineering is not working, but the overall reachability is still there. So the actual real invalids are not that many anymore, which means that all of them that come in is actually a real hijack or a real problem, right? So the need for exceptions, I think, is extremely limited, if even needed at all, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's an approach that I don't think everyone can take, but given your clout and the site and the importance that AWS plays in all these networks, yeah, you can show that hand and say, come on, it's only a small lift from your side. We've made the lift on our side. Let's get on board and let's just quickly do this. So talking about those modes that you've incorporated, that's would have probably also incorporated a little bit of slowness into the system as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So as I said, like we have I would say somewhat of a non-standard implementation. I think we always try to be on the little side of caution when we do this big thing, since this is a network-wide system, right, with potential very large impact if something is broken or if something happens or there's a bug or something. So today we do a lot of checks, right? Like it's basically we share the same city as the Boeing factory, right? And maybe we have learned a little bit of things from them on how to do like pre-flight checks. So there is many things. Like we observe, for example, velocity on ROAS published. So if we see like sudden surges in either direction, like if there's like 10,000 new ROAS coming in, or if there's 10,000 ROAS disappearing, which is probably the bigger problem, there will be tickets being created. There is alarming where we try to figure out, it's like, hey, is actually something going to break because of this, or why was this ROAS disappearing, or why did so many came in, and what was the history behind it, right? So I will try to refrain from using the word like machine learning or artificial intelligence, but there's a little bit of that, right? Where we are trying to learn what is the normal behavior. Just today, there is certain TAs that suddenly drops off. Like good example could be the Indonesian CA that just, I don't know, seems to be hosted on a very slow internet connection occasionally, or maybe they're DDoS or something like that. I don't know. But sometimes that server simply doesn't respond, and we cannot get any new VRP submitted. So like there is a little bit of observability that we do in that space. And that's, I think, is one of the things that we spent the most time on. Like doing the actual validation is actually fairly easy. There is at least 2-3 good RPKI clients to choose from, such as Routinator, or RPKI client, or the Fort Validator. But building the tools around that to make it work in a large or small environment is what takes time. So that's what we did. So I personally follow some of these trends and flows internally. I make sure, I have like a health dashboard, which I check is like, okay, have a lot of ROAS dropped off, or have something new happened, or do we see fluctuations, or stuff like that, right? And that's something that we keep a lookout for.
Yeah, I think what you've described is it's just a natural understanding of what networking is. You can't fully automate a network, that you do have to have that person there to keep an eye on and an understanding of the variances of the network, particularly when you're talking about global network as well, and the variances associated with each country.
Oh yeah, and we look at this thing as a mission critical system, right? Like it's equally important as our DNS servers or DHCP servers, or like essentially anything in the network system, right? So we need good health checks. We need on-call teams. Like we have on-call teams for RPKI that is like 24/7, taking alarms, looking at tickets, trying to see if anything's broken, fix that immediately. So for us, it's a severity one type of service for sure.
Looking towards the future, you said you're moving towards that delegated model. What are your impressions of the future of RPKI, and what other initiatives are you interested in or keeping an eye on and trying to look to incorporate into AWS's routing security efforts?
Great. Yeah, so I mean, we can start with what I think is nearest in time, or rather what we're currently working on, right? So the delegated stuff for sure. There's still things in there that I think should be fixed. There is a little bit on how easy or hard it can be between different RIRs, how to actually enroll into that. I think there is a little bit of more room for flexibility in the system as well, where you can run hybrid modes, where you can run modes where, maybe you use publishing parent, for example, or you use only your own publication, like RDP services. So, but I mean, the industry as a whole is looking at this, right? So it's not only us. It's everyone is really on the same page, I would say. So we just need a bit more time to actually get the flexibility inside the system that we want. So that is, I think, the super near term development. And as I said, our goal is to have 100% of our prefixes in our own delegated system. We're not really there yet. We're still like 10% short or so. But we are slowly moving there. And I think for us, it's a good learning experience to do that. Looking a bit more in the future, right? Which I think is where the really interesting stuff happens. So the medium term things we are mostly interested in is the development of ASPA. Which helps us solve I wouldn't say the biggest problem, but one of the lowest hanging fruit currently, and that is the AS path spoofing problem. Right, today we still see attacks, of course, like we see hijacks where origin is spoofed, because that's really the only way to do this these days. Like we see the occasional, I would say, traditional type of hijack where you just steal a prefix. We also see that those are fairly successful in most cases, given that we had a good deployment of RPKI. Like, we have 50 to 50+% at least of all global IP space has a ROA, or at least the one with traffic on it, which is great. That we all help each other register routes. That's super important. And then in terms of origin validation, most of the large like intercontinental providers, they already have origin validation turned on. There is only one or two still left in that club of tier ones, or whatever you want to call them, which is great, because that limits that hijacks simply cannot pass continents anymore, which is great. So with a little bit of more push, like just the last push there for a couple of large providers, then I think it will be almost impossible to even perform standard BGP hijack that cross continents, right? What we need after that is for the more advanced hijacks, right? The one where they actually spoof the origin. And the origin can be spoofed in two ways. Either you just spoof the origin, which is not very scary, I think, because at least for us, it's not very scary, I guess, because we typically have like 1.5 AS hops to anyone in the world or something like that. So those hijacks are not very successful, I would say. They can be combined with if you also deaggregate a little bit, right? Then you can get decent success with it. But there has been an uptake in the even more advanced version, and that is that other ISPs are simply pretending to be AWS or pretending to be someone else to shorten the AS path, to essentially make it a similar AS path as the real AS path, right? And that's where you can get real success with origin based spoofing attacks. To combat this, there's a couple of things we can do. Today, we really like, I mean, it's the only tool we have, which is peer locking, right? Which essentially is that we need to talk with large providers. It's like, hey, we would like to make sure that you never accept our routes from anyone that isn't us. And how to deploy this in routers is a little bit different. Some just build the AS path prefix list. If they are automated, it could get scary because we know for sure that these skillful attackers, they have no problem in spoofing AS macros, right? So we have seen that happen a couple of times, and we keep track of that as well. But peer locking, right? We can have a static list that is like, regardless of what the automated prefix list or automated ASPOT filter build says, always block Amazon from anyone that isn't Amazon or one of our transit providers. So that's why we really like the development of ASPA, because ASPA is essentially the codification of peer locking to some extent, and it's built into the RPKI ecosystem. So it's essentially a new type of object. So we can reuse everything that we and everyone else has built for RPKI for a new type of object that would help with the origin based attacks, which is really the last frontier, I would say. I'm not going to say that it solves the hijack problem indefinitely, because it wouldn't, but it would at least reduce the surface area where one would be possible to do this with. So I hope that we can be one of the first ones to publish ASPA records. There will probably be some smaller networks that are before us, but from the large tech scene or large big tech companies, I think we would be at the very forefront at least. We have already today essentially modeled these ASPA records, how we think that they will look like for a company such as ours. It's not super clear cut exactly how we're going to do this, because we have a lot of, I would say, complex relationships with certain ISPs, which means that they perhaps doesn't fit in a traditional transit or peering relationship. Maybe it's something that is somewhere in between. So there is some of those things we need to do, but we're already thinking about it. We're already seeing if we should make some of our relationships perhaps a bit more standardized. We try to get away from these special one-offs. We try to get away from having different routing policies or different things depending on where you peer with someone, because that surely makes the expression in an ASPA object much harder. So, and I think that's also a good clue or a good cue for other large companies to start thinking. You can model these ASPAs on paper, right? I think that's a good exercise, because even if the standard is not ratified yet, we have a rough idea how it would look like. So I think that's what we've been mostly excited about in a midterm. For the very long term, we are looking at BGPsec. It is a word that makes a lot of people just like, oh, come on, not again, right? And I guess I'm to some extent I'm on that bandwagon too, because BGPsec is super complex. It is certainly not a new standard. It's untested. It is hard to read. It is a little hard to understand as well. But I do think that in 7 to 10 years' time, I think able networks will run BGPsec in between each other. I don't envision that it will be like a global standard or a global type of thing, such as RPKI has been, because RPKI can be deployed by basically anyone, regardless of who you are or company size, or it doesn't matter if you're a transit provider or an enterprise customer, or if you're a super advanced cloud shop, or if you're, it doesn't matter, right? Like there is an application that you can do for sure. BGPsec is much more complex. It's probably something that that we can do together with other very capable networks, because it does require, for example, that you have a distributed routing platform. It doesn't require, but most likely will, where you, like for example us, like we have moved most of our BGP operations away from routers. Like if you peer with us today, you're not actually peering with the router you're connected to. You're peering with a server somewhere. And with that, we have a possibility to scale up the performance quite a lot if we need to. And for BGPsec, there will be a lot of CPU cycles that's needed given how the protocol works. So I think between able networks, this is a quite interesting thing. And I think that would truly solve the last problems of BGP hijacks, because then we can not only verify the origin, we can also verify that it is the correct origin, that you cannot even try to pretend to be AS6509, because you need our keys to be able to validate that you are the correct 16519. So that's the 7 to 10 year plan, and that's basically how it looks like internally, and that's how we, how we think about this internally, at least. it's
really interesting, and it's a good point where you meant going back to your Asper strategy about using this to evaluate the connectivity that you have with all your partners to help with streamlining that in a lot of respects. That's what we're all trying to do with the networking, is trying to make it simpler, and this is a good way to help with visualizing that and bringing everything into a easier model. So while Asper might not be something that you can necessarily be deploying now, it's a good way to visualize that and get you ready for the future, because there are more and more examples of it being used to help in certain circumstances. And if AWS is getting on board with it, then you might have to soon get on board with it, since you most likely are a customer of AWS.
Yeah.
Finally, as to the title of the webinar, the path to MANRS. So what have you gained out of MANRS? Why did AWS join MANRS, and what do you see as its use moving forward, and how you can contribute as well?
Right. I mean, I've always been a friend of MANRS, right? And I think it's a perfect way for companies to collaborate on sometimes quite complex topics, right? And for us, the main driver for being part of this is basically contacts, I would say. Like, we get contacts, I remember like 5 years ago or 4 years ago, I believe, it was the MANRS Cloud CDN working group. It was the first meeting of that. And even if we haven't been meeting under like a MANRS umbrella for quite some time there in that group, like that group meets anyway, right? Because we became friends, and we set out the rules, or other, that was like the MANRS idea, right? It's like, this is what we all believe in, like, let's collaborate around that, and we are in contact basically every month to talk about these topics, right? And I think those type of contacts wouldn't have happened if it was not facilitated by a MANRS working group, right? And before Amazon, right, I was a part of the ISP working group, right? And it's a very effective way to meet the right people and to get in contact with decision makers and people that actually know how this thing should work. For people listening in or watching this later, it's if you feel that this is hard to do, right, which I absolutely respect, and I think it's hard, then find people in your MANRS group, right, and talk with them. They probably have the answers for you, right? So it's a very valuable context for sure.
Yeah, and that's what we encourage as well, and that's why we have you on board, to share your experiences so that others can learn from them as well, and hopefully just engage yourself. Like, you're approachable on these aspects, and as is everyone in the working group, whether it be CDN or the operators working group or the IXPs as well. So that's a great point in terms of what MANRS is. It's a community. It's a community coming together to agree on norms, and that's at the heart of it.
Yeah, and I mean, none of these, there's not a single company in this world that can change this business, right? Like, we all need to do it together, right? That's why it's a community effort, and the whole RPKI boom, if you want to call it that, the last 3-4 years, it's just because people got together under MANRS or MANRS-like type of organizations or umbrellas. It's like, all right, how do we do this together, right? Because if you do it and I do it and someone over there does it, then combined, it actually changes the internet, right? Which I think is really cool, right? That we essentially need a few years. I think there's a famous graph somewhere on I think it was Aurelian that created it initially, but it was during like a 3-month window, how many invalids were visible in certain ISPs during a certain time. And you could see that basically all the large providers, they turn it off roughly within the same 3-month time frame, which was because of like contacts within MANRS, and that we went to these NOG meetings together, and we had like fruitful conversations. It's like, all right, let's just do this now. Like, let's go. Like, if we invest time, you also invest time. Let's do it together. And you could see that these graphs were like, boom, like provider number 1 turned it on, then provider 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see like a steady decline in the graph for invalid routes. And the same thing happened as well with rower registrations, right? Like, we were part of it when we started to register 10,000 routes a day, and then we saw that others followed along, right? And like those graphs were like hockey sticking, right? Which is awesome, right? And that's the type of movement needed to actually move the needle in the end, right? And we need this community to get together again. We need to do this more times, because we're gonna have ASPA ahead of us. We have other standards as well, probably coming along, probably things that we haven't even thought about yet, right? So I mean, this group of people has to get together every year or every 3 years to do big changes to the internet, right? And really the only way to do it is trust within a community, I would say.
Finally, I just wanted to talk about how we are expanding MANRS as well. I mean, we've done a very good job in terms of getting the core of the internet on board. We've got 1,000 participants who are mainly looking after the connectivity of the internet. But now, we've got some 70,000 more networks to still to deploy RPKI. How do we go about trying to convert those and to understand the importance of routing security?
Oh, that's a hard question, I guess. But I mean, I think we're getting there slowly, right? I mean, I think it's great that MANRS has started to engage with like enterprise companies and these things, like the ones that are typically quite hard to reach. Yeah, getting reach into that part of the world, I think, is going to be crucial going forward. And I think that we are slowly seeing it, right? And from our perspective, like one of the things that we've been doing the last 2 years is like the bring your own IP stuff, right? Which is a very interesting endeavor, given that RPKI is enforced. Like, to be able to bring your own IP, you have to learn RPKI. And I think, and there's no way around it. Like, we don't even have a function built to be able to opt out of it, right? And I think that has been an interesting thing, because you start to see enterprise companies that perhaps are not very knowledgeable in internet. They were like, oh, okay, to be able to move to the cloud, we actually need to learn RPKI. There's more companies doing this as well. And I think this is a very helpful glimpse into that world, where they need to start to care about internet infrastructure, which is previously they didn't have to do it. I mean, we can clearly see. I mean, one of my pet projects, right, is keeping track of what happens in the IRR ecosystem, which I think is a very broken ecosystem, right? And we see tons and tons and tons of problem there. And you could see that there is objects in there that hasn't been touched for like 25 years, but they are still fully operational things, which to me is like, wow, this is a company that is active on the internet but hasn't touched any of their bookmaking stuff the last 25 years. That's amazing, and scary at the same time, right? If the community gets together, like, we start to do these things, and I think I would encourage certainly all of my competitors to also require RPKI for BYP enrollment or whatever you want to do with your customers, because I think it's a good learning experience for everyone involved, actually. So I think that could be a good way forward.
Yeah, no, that's good. Some good examples there. That's all I had to ask of you today, Fredrik. We don't have any questions coming through on the chat. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that. It's a great insight into a company which is quite open in terms of what it does with its networking, and there's lots to learn from it. But we really appreciate it from the community's aspect. And like I said before, those who are out there watching, attending now and watching, please come forward and share your stories as well, because as we try to convert the other networks out there to take routing security seriously, which is what we need to do for RPKI to take hold, then we need everyone on board.
I agree.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Fredrik. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we hope to be back again with another Path to Manners in the future. Thanks again.
That's very good. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.